Brisbane, Australia. This is episode 91 of The Normal Blokes, a podcast dedicated to improving the competitive 40k experience. I'm Denith, and today we've got Luke with us.
Hey guys, how we doing?
And Liam.
Good evening.
All right, how you boys doing today? It's we've had a good month of new releases with Sisters and AdMech and stuff, hey?
Yep, been getting stomped by the AdMech.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
They are pretty terrifying overall. Not gonna lie.
Yep. I played the new Sisters and the new AdMech on the weekend and lost both games, and they're very good. But I guess today we'll cover some sundry material, talking about the Normal Blokes GT that we're running in September, and then I guess with these new armies coming out, they've got a lot of shots, they've got a lot of shooting. So today's episode will be about avoiding shooting and things you can do to not get blown away from the other side of the table. I guess before we start, we posted up a Facebook event just today, and Liam's been behind the scenes organising the Down Under pairing side of it, but we're running a GT in Brisbane on the 18th and 19th of September, the Normal Blokes GT. Liam, do you want to talk a bit about that, since you're kind of the brains behind it?
Oh, by the brains, Denise means that I am the monkey that put the event on DUP. So we are running a GT in September. It's kind of the second one of these that we've run. We ran one last year at the Wellers Hill Bowls Club. The idea behind this is that every year we do want to run a 40k tournament, continue the growing scene here in Brisbane, and sort of bring people from all over, as usual, to play some competitive games of 40k. It's pretty simple. It's pretty standard tournament rules. It's going to be 2,000 points, anything goes, including Forge World. There's going to be no power level limit or anything at this event. It's going to be pretty much run open slather, take what you want, but don't complain if a tower bar can't hold more than one objective. And we are going to be using the WTC FAQ in full. I'm going to talk a bit more about that at another time. This event is going to be held at the Brook Hotel, and a big shout out and thank you to Josh McGowan and Gladiator Gaming, both for helping us with the venue hire and finding a venue. Venues are particularly tough to get at the moment and organised with all of the COVID restrictions, and also places booking up. I'm pretty sure everyone and their dog is trying to plan a wedding from the time when everywhere was locked down. And also big thanks to Josh, obviously. Brisbane 40k has been reliant on Josh McGowan for a significant proportion of time, providing high quality terrain for 40k tournaments, and our event will be using almost entirely Josh McGowan's tables. He and Gladiator Gaming are doing some really awesome stuff, and he's making more tables every day. So thanks very much, Josh, and hope to see everyone there. You can find the event on Facebook, or it is on DUP. If you want to sign up, you got to sign up on DUP and pay either via the link on the Facebook page. The link is also in the Players Pack, which is on both DUP, and again, the link will be on Facebook to both DUP and the Players Pack.
Yeah,
that's pretty much the long and short of it.
Yeah, and for people who are keen to sign up, once you've paid your entry fee and signed up on DUP, just shoot us a message or an email. The details for that are on the Players Pack and the event, just to let us know so we can add you to the paid list. But yeah, we're excited. I think the three of us would also like to be playing in that event if we could. As normal, whenever we play in our own events, we are not eligible for prizes in terms of the prize money and stuff. But yeah, it'd be great to see you guys there and hopefully catch some games. But yeah, anything to add there, Lukey?
I'm really keen actually on the no power level limit, because a lot of times in competitive tournaments, there's always some sort of restriction, and then people don't get to bring those magic models that they've spent ages building and painting. So I know we got a friend, Nick.
Hey,
Nick
let's not reveal any secrets, mate.
Oh, okay. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, someone's bringing a revenant.
The real meta will be stomping through soon.
Yeah.
Well, look, I want to run a bunch of those things, but they're not always reaching that power threshold. So it's good to, for a change, just to have an open power level limit.
Hey, Luke, let's play the Astraeus, mate. I wonder if it'll be good.
Yeah, one day maybe.
I actually played someone on TTS this week that had a Harridan. That was painful. It was really strong.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I versed. And I was like, hey, this is kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, I'm keen to see what people bring. See if we can see an Eldar Titan back in the mix. I'll challenge someone to do that.
some flying Custodies ships or something.
Oh yeah, the Ares.
Amazing from Custos that you never heard of again.
Yeah.
Stuff like
that
always
Ares gunship, man. Look, I hope the flying triangles never come back.
Or like the tower. What is it? The tower.
The Tiger Shark.
Tiger Shark.
Yeah.
Please, someone bring one of them. Or
7
two.
kilograms of resin coming in hot.
Oh man. I remember I went to an event and someone ran 3 tiger sharks, but they weren't actual tiger sharks. They were like paper mached tiger sharks. And it was just like, I was like, wow, like props for you actually doing this, but that's a lot of board space. But man,
wow.
Yeah, it was hectic. But yeah,
I don't know whether to be proud of the effort or not proud of the effort.
But what was I going to say? Yeah, I guess leading on to our main topic then, with all those big scary things that might be, stomping around in September at the Normal XGT, let's talk about ways to not get shot up, boys. So the shooting phase. Shooting is a big part of 40k, and a number of armies do a fair bit of damage in the shooting phase. I know nothing Liam plays does; he just likes to punch stuff. But there's a lot of armies that can really lay down the smack. You've got these 20-man blobs of Admech and Sisters with full rerolls. You've got these chicken walking Ballistari rolling around that are just killing anything they see. You've got this cool Death Watch list that Lennon won GT with over in America that has a lot of guns. So yeah, we'll roll into the first way we're going to avoid these shooting armies. Luke, take it away with terrain, bro.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot online as well, a lot of different opinions on what defines good 40k terrain.
I like that. Opinions.
Let it be known. I think we can all agree that the Gladiator Gaming tournaments always have a good variance of terrain, which make a lot of armies all playable, and we like to take advantage of those obscuring terrains and even line of sight blocking terrains that aren't obscuring but can offer, say, infantry the ability to hide. We like to utilize these terrain types to ignore shooting. So obscuring terrain is the big one that everybody always knows about. And this is the primary way which I think most people hide from shooting.
I guess one thing is understanding on a table that like a lot of these infantry units that we use, they move like 6 inches for the most part, right? And like a lot of these terrain features that are on a classic table of 40k, like you saw the different layouts coming out from the official G-Dub tournaments and stuff, these terrain features are not 6 inches apart most of the time. They're often like 10, 12, 14 inches apart, right? For the big obscuring terrain features. So like understanding that you need to have ways to move around the table, because the game isn't really about sitting in your corner and just not getting shot. It's also about moving around, scoring objectives, scoring secondaries, and setting yourself up into positions where you can do things without getting shot. So having an army or having ways to move around the board and stay safe is quite important. And different armies do this in different ways. Like, some armies that rely solely on fast moving bikes and flying units have a natural move of 12 plus, so they can just move around really quickly. Other armies utilize transports in different ways. So if you have a rhino that rolls up next to a building, sure, the rhino might die, but the infantry might be able to fall out of that rhino when it dies in or behind an obscuring terrain feature, if that makes sense. So planning how you're going to use terrain when you get to a table is quite important, obviously dependent on the matchup. Anything to add there, Liam?
I think as well, something that is a really, really good habit to get into is when you get to the table, make sure you, first of all, define the borders of all area terrain features. Because with obscuring terrain particularly, obviously, it's a magical infinite height wall that blocks everything. But also that magical wall magically ends at random points in the table. And if you're playing on terrain that has, what I'm going to call a base, like a terrain that is actually mounted on something. Rules as written, that base is part of that infinite wall. And that means that if you're standing on that base, you can be seen. But if you're standing behind it, you are magically invisible in your invisibility cloak. So, look, I mock this concept, but also it's really important that if you're playing on terrain, you have a chat with your opponent. Just talk with people and say, hey, look, we normally play this, or I normally play that, and make sure you both agree about where the area terrain starts and ends, because that's going to be really important in defining, like you said, Denise, how far you need to move and where you need to be to actually be safe from the guns, because boy, are there lots of guns in the game at the moment.
Yeah, and the other thing with using terrain is we've got different types, not just obscuring. We've got things that will give our army and infantry beasts and swarm cover, like light cover terrain. We've got dense cover, which gives a neg one to hit if you're in it or touching it, which is really handy against some of the armies that rely on like ballistic skill 4, for example, not just ballistic skill 2 and 3. And then even in terms of using your terrain in your deployment zone to counter deploy. And you had a really good point about this, Liam, pre-recording. You were discussing it beforehand. Just talk about how you'd use that in a counter deployment scenario when you're against an opponent with a lot of big guns.
Yeah, so obviously people who are playing heavy shooting armies, the shooting is all pervasive and can probably reach across the table. So using line of sight blocking terrain even in the deployment phase is going to be kind of the critical thing you have to do to not get shot off the table. Now, part of that is that if your army has some fast moving units, or even if you have some shooting of your own, putting your shooting, if you look at a table in a sort of rectangle fashion, if you put your shooting units, or let's say a fast melee unit, on the left-hand side of the table, chances are your opponent is probably not going to put their really vulnerable high damage shooting directly across from that unit, because obviously there's a chance if you go first that you're going to shoot them, or you're going to charge across the table and you're going to get their shooting units. And nobody really wants to be locked up in combat, which is something we'll talk a lot more about later, about how to get locked in combat. So if you do that, you can expect them to deploy their shooting unit, the thing we're talking about here, on the other side of the table, as far away as possible. And so if you actually have a bit of a plan for your deployment, you can start thinking about where they're going to put their units and how they're going to put their units down and in what order, and so plan the game in that manner. A really good example of this is most Space Marine lists at the moment have a big unit of Eradicators that you already mentioned before. Big unit of Eradicators is terrifying for any vehicles to deal with. And if you've got a bit of a balanced army, with some vehicles and some other things, if you put your vehicle down in a sort of not a very vulnerable, but a place where the Eradicators can reach on the far left-hand side of the table, chances are the Space Marine player will probably want to get the most out of their Eradicators. So they'll put their Eradicators on that side of the table to try and fight your vehicles. But then, if you've got redeployment abilities, or if you have other units that don't want to be near the Eradicators, you can then put them on the far other side and they'll be safe. So it sounds really convoluted, but long story short, try to have a think about how your opponent is going to use their shooting armies. Because unlike combat units, shooting units really do one thing. They shoot. That's it. Whereas combat is kind of a bit more nebulous, a bit more nuanced in its use. And so you can actually work around the shooting list to get the most out of your list.
Yeah, and in some regards, with a number of units, let's look at like a Redemptor Dreadnought, or look at something quite static like a Repulsor. Like realistically, when it's down, right? Like it's not moving like a million inches to the other side of the table on turn 2. It's there. So if you're playing those mind games, like Liam said, if you've got a unit of Eradicators or something that'll just dunk on a vehicle like that, and you stick them in one corner, your opponent's not going to be anywhere near that if they're, wanting to keep their vehicle alive. And we'll go more into this topic of target priority in the next step, or the next topic here. But yeah, exactly right. You can play those mind games early on. That's a really good point. But I guess the next thing we'll go into is using reserves well. And we see a lot of players, when they go up to a table, they kind of have a plan on organizing their target priority and what needs to stay alive, and figuring out what needs to be reserved. I'll give a good example. We'll mention him a 91st time on our podcast, Mr. Wayne Russell. So
here we go.
At a recent team event, Wayne played a horde of 100 Poxwalkers, and he had a practice game against one of the local boys, Nick Argent, who ran a couple of Nightmare Eras and a lot of like Lightning Lock Knights. And he said, I lose like 60 Poxwalkers turn one. I can't really play this game. And we actually played their team in the final round, and Wayne went into Nick's Night line. His big Knight force on Vital Intelligence, real long deployment zone, where it's pretty much this big long line of Knights that will just shoot you. And Wayne did this really cool play where he just reserved more than half his Poxwalkers. And that was really, in that game, it meant that if the Knights went first, or, early in the game, they couldn't get this substantial lead by killing heaps of things. They would, kill a bit, but by turn 3, everything would come in, and there was no way that all of that was getting chewed through later in the game. So that's just one example of how you can think about the flow of the game, think about your target priority, think about what units you might have as a like a key unit in your army that you need to counter, and keep that safe and not give your opponent the ability to engage with that until it's your terms, if that makes sense. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I think the same is true in reverse, right? Like if you've got key shooting units like a unit of eradicators, putting them off the table means the threat is always there. It's more omnipresent. Like you can't actually, you can hide from it, but the effort required for somebody to hide from a unit of eradicators in reserve is much greater than a unit of eradicators sitting in a ruin that's in one location, one spot, and you can play around it. So this sort of attitude of maybe I won't use my cool toys turn one doesn't just work for melee units to keep you safe from shooting. It works for shooting units too.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah.
Just extending on that as well. This is something that I always talk about with Denise, especially. I always say that sometimes having your big killer unit just like available as a looming threat is more than actually having it do something itself. Mm-hmm. So just because you have this massive shooter unit doesn't mean it has to always be on the board shooting. If it achieves the goal of making someone play a different way without actually shooting, then that unit's already performed its duties, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So, and there was one other thing I wanted to touch on: when to reserve and when to not reserve. Being aware of your limitations of your army when you do reserve some of your models. For example, if you have some units that you want to keep alive and need to do that damage, you need to be aware of how much your opponent will put the pressure on you if you reserve too many of them, or like how many can I reserve without my opponent taking advantage of it, so to speak. Because if you reserve too much, then they're like, okay, well, you've got nothing on the board. I can just dominate for the first 1 or 2 turns, and then it might just be game. And that's a big mistake that I did last year at the Brisbane GT, where I played against Hayden. He had a Imperial Fist Flyers list, and I wanted to keep my Dread Knights safe for the first turn so I didn't get blown off the board. And then he just went, okay, I'm just going to do as much damage as I can before they come on. So he just fully committed. So that's just an example of knowing the limits of how much you can reserve and how much you can't reserve to avoid shooting.
Really good point. I think one other thing as well is when you come to the table and you roll off a deployment and stuff, looking at the deployment zone you have and how much terrain you have there to work with is a pretty important factor, because now there's a step, in the GT pack where you have to declare all your reserves and pre-game things. So having a plan before that, you don't want to get halfway through your deployment and go, wow, I can't hide these key units. I've messed up. And then something important dies when you could have just, for 1 CP or something, just chucked it in reserve or deep strike it, the strat. So, anything to add to that, Liam?
No, I think that's pretty clear. You've got to look at the table and plan ahead.
Yeah, cool. I guess the next thing is we're really just going to rattle off a couple things before we get to the meat and potatoes, but there's a number of factions that have some abilities that are literally just massive anti-shooting, get fucked, you can't shoot abilities. The most prevalent one that we see is the old bodyguard rule. So Death Shroud, have these. The company, what are they? Company veterans and, all the command squads and stuff that Space Marines have these. The Sisters Celestians now have these.
Crypto Thralls.
Crypto Cucks have these, yep. So all these abilities are really interesting because classically with the Lookout Sir rule, people have this, perception of, you can have a little unit of 2 or 3 lads next to a character. Oh, cool. Those 2 or 3 lads die. Well, the character's now, exposed. With the bodyguard rule, you could have like one dude that's super tough with a storm shield in cover on like a 0-up save. And you have to commit so much to kill that little lad. And you can't target the character until he's dead. So you could start with a unit of 3 or 4 of these really tough guys. Like Dark Angels did it, quite prolifically. Death Shroud, Terminators still do it for Death Guard, and I feel the Sisters Celestians will do it a fair bit as well. So those, if you have access to them, it's really nice, and it's not just nice to protect your characters, but it's also nice to mess with the obscuring terrain and get your army or get your characters into positions where you otherwise wouldn't be able to commit to with regular Lookout Sir. Anything to add on this, guys?
I mean, these abilities are inherently strong in that your models can't be shot, but it's more about the application there that really tips armies over the edge. You can actually build almost entire lists based on the core concept that the models that I care about can't be shot where I need. That's literally how the Raven Guard dark, what they call Talon Master lists function, in that they can't be shot back, and so they can shoot. But also, Denise, you mentioned before, in deployment, planning where you can be to be safe. Having these bodyguard units, or even having units that have stratagems that stop them being shot in general, allows you to not have to be in terrain. If you literally can't be shot, you can put units like Talon Masters at the front of your army out in the open and play around that. You don't need as much terrain. So this is really a meta call. It's really important for people to keep in mind that if you are playing in an environment that, let's call it, a non-dense terrain environment, then you might actually need to really look at some of this tech, because almost every army has something in this category.
Like, even if you look at, like, you've got orcs that have got shield, you've got Tau who have, the drones, your shield drones. You've got even Guard to some extent has, some Scion stratagem, Shield of Flesh, things like that to divert or get neg hits and stuff. Custodes have the equivalent shield strats, Deathwatch, Death Guard have a bunch of powers. You got the Phobos power, stuff like that. All this crazy stuff that can just divert or just gimp shooting straight off the bat.
Wow, you listed that so quickly. That was really impressive.
Did you say salamanders? I think.
Oh yeah, like self-sacrifice, right? Salamanders, that's a huge one.
I think that was the only one you didn't get, but you did a good damn job.
I need to spend less time going through codexes. So like, I'm like, whoa. I'm personally messing around with the Deathwatch stuff because they've got, they can shroud the Corpus Blackstar. They've got a power called Mantle of Shadows. We can shroud a unit, and they can't be shot unless they're within 12. And you
Such a cool power.
You stick a Phobos Libby in there as well, and you run Shroud with that, so you can shroud another unit that can actually shoot. All of a sudden, there's 3 units that can't be shot turn 1. So there's ways you can kind of neuter people's alpha strikes and things like that. Anything else on this topic, lads?
Nah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, just wanted to throw one last thing. There's new abilities that are coming out that aren't very common. Eldar's had it for quite a while, and that's the you can't target anything unless it's within a certain distance. I actually don't mind these things. So, for example, the power for Hemlocks, I've actually forgot the power. But anyway, they have a psychic power which restricts. They can only target the closest thing within 18. Otherwise, they can't really shoot. So it's it's a really unique tool that I don't think is used at all, if I've ever actually seen it in a competitive list yet. And there might be something worth considering when you get these massive armies like AdMech with 80 shots that auto wound on 4s. I mean, it's pretty good if you can dictate what that shoots at. So,
if they
it might be
only
worth
commit
looking
to one unit, that's huge.
Exactly. And it's just a waste. So those things might have a bit of play coming into the future, just something to be aware about. That's all.
Yeah, good point.
That's really cool.
Yeah. All right, Liam, we're setting you loose, mate. Here we go. Combat.
Oh, I'm putting my seatbelt on.
Buckle up. No, so look, I'm as far as 40k players go, I'm a pretty aggressive 40k player. I like armies that run across the table. I like possessed that go burr. I like armies that do that are aggressive, and part and parcel with that is combat armies. Now, on paper, as has been the case since the entire time that I think all of us have been playing 40k, there's always this perception that the death of combat armies will be shooting armies. But I actually reckon, the opposite of that is also true. But the skill cap and what's needed is really, really hard work. I think combat armies can be the death of shooting armies. And part of this and how to get there is making sure that you have a complete mastery of all parts of the charge, the fight, and even the morale phase to get the most out of all of your models. Stuff like this, because the 40k rules are very simple, the very core concept that if you're in combat, you cannot shoot. And more importantly, most things, especially with the changed fly, most things cannot fall back and shoot without the use of a CP investment or a warlord trait or some variation thereof of a special rule, which is definitely not as common as it used to be. Like, I remember not even too long ago that everything with fly could fall back and shoot. I remember playing Luke's repulsors at Mensa, and I remember thinking that not only do I need entire shovels to pick up my army, but also I can't even do anything about it because if I tag models, they can still just shoot. That was fun. Hey, Luke.
That was good. I got to roll so many dice.
Yeah, me too. I rolled a lot of 6-up invos. I rolled over 300 saves that game.
That was funny. That was funny.
Well,
That
yeah,
was
because
funny for one of us. Sorry.
I had 360 Gretchen, and you killed all of them. So I rolled at least 360 saves. That's wild if you think about it.
It is absolutely crazy.
Anyway, my point is that there's a really you can almost infinitely dive into the tricks you can learn in combat. And this isn't just, oh, cool, I can use this stratagem to do this certain thing. I'm talking about the movement. How you move your models, the order you move your models, knowing all of the rules in this phase makes a huge difference. Very simple example, and something that I use almost every game that I play that I think takes some people by surprise. And it's that obviously when you pile in this edition, you have to move 3 inches towards the closest enemy model. But if there's 2 models that are equidistant, you get to pick the model that you move towards. So for example, if you want to really get some bonus movement out of your models, you can pile in towards whatever model you need to. And then once you're equidistant from 2 models, you can then start moving towards the next one. So you can move around a squad rather than get stuck into one model. And this is huge. You can do so many different things with this little idea. This little concept that you can have, let's say, I don't know, for my army at the moment, I'm playing Chaos and I'm using Keepers of Secrets. If I charge a squad of infiltrators, it can be really annoying if they sort of block my movement. But if I charge them, I can move 2d6 in the charge phase, 3 inches in the pile-in, and then 3 inches in the consolidate phase around them so that I'm now out of line of sight or I'm wherever I need to be. There's so much different stuff you can do here. And it's about every turn of the game thinking about how much you can shut down your opponent's army. Looking at the new AdMech and Sisters codexes, the shooting is crazy. That's why we're talking about this in this episode. Because armies like AdMech and Sisters with some of the characters, the reroll all hits, reroll all wounds, extra AP, ignores cover. But AdMech always wounding on a hit roll of a 4+. That is prodigious for strength 3 weapons. These sort of abilities mean that they can do so much damage, but they can also do absolutely nothing if you can stop them from shooting altogether. And let's look at an AdMech army. Denise, you mentioned before the Ballistarius, the chicken walkers, the lovely chicken walkers with the Cognis weapons, right? Those things have a gigantic oval base. The oval base is something like 5.5 to 6 inches long. Now, if one of those is at the front of the army just holding an objective, and you happen to charge that Ballistarius, I look at that model as 6 inches of free movement, because I can pile in and consolidate around the side of its base and potentially tag or touch another unit that he wants to shoot with. And there's always going to be abilities to allow them to fall back and shoot, but you have to make them make those choices by using the movement. So if you are tagging, even if you've got lots of little units, let's say you're playing Drakari and you've got lots of little Raiders or Venoms or whatever, if you're tagging and you're playing, let's say you're playing another Dark Eldar player, if you're tagging heaps of stuff, the shooting units, the things that they want to do, on one hand, you're going to be losing units and models. But on the other hand, they are not actually getting to use the toys they want to play with. And you got to ask yourself, at what point does that just become a win-win for you? I don't know. I think that one of the biggest and best parts about this game is all of the tricks you can do in the pile in and consolidate step. I think it's some of the parts that are almost the most enjoyable part of this game. It's the most nitty-gritty. It's the most, probably the most argued about in tournament play. Like I can't even, some of the more intense arguments that, not that I've been part of, that I've seen at events have definitely been involved in the, are you 3 inches away? What constitutes an inch? I can't believe people actually, like, there's so many intense arguments about this, but, I've also had people become, bright beetroot red over the idea of what is within an inch and what is an inch. The fact that those two concepts are different, and different rules use those terms interchangeably. Anyway, there's something to be said for taking the time to actually read the fight phase rules properly. And by properly, I mean take a bit of time to actually think about what everything means in terms of moving towards the closest model, who can activate, who can fight. So many games I play, people still don't understand that the second rank of models this edition have to be half an inch from models that are half an inch from enemy models, not 1 inch from 1 inch.
Yeah.
The 1 inch rule only applies to the first rank of models. You have to be half an inch from half an inch to fight with the second rank. And that is almost universally done wrong. There's heaps of things to talk about here. And I mean, Denise, if you want to steer this word train in a certain direction, I'll happily go wherever Conductor Denise leads.
No.
Because there's lots of different stuff I can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to add to that is another good thing about getting stuck into combat is you're now dictating to some extent what your opponent is shooting. Like if they can't fall back and shoot, let's say they have vehicles or monsters and stuff, they can shoot into the combat. Like they might say, oh, cool, you've tagged me, I can still shoot you. And you're like, cool, well, you're shooting the thing that I don't care about or that has a role to play in this game, and that's just to tag you up, you know? So like having that ability to dictate what your opponent's doing with their guns, it is a 5-turn game, but on the same note, it's only a 5-turn game. They've only got 5 turns to use their guns. And if for 1 or 2 of those turns, you're tagging them up with, you know, your cheap chaff units, that's lovely. Then you've got the rest of the board behind those chaff units and you're just laughing. So yeah, there's definitely so much we can go into. And for people who want to dive deep into it, and if you watch, you know, like tournament streams or certain people doing battle reports talking about this kind of stuff, or even just playing with players who are experienced in this kind of thing, it's a really good way to pick it up. I guess a couple of honorable mentions, some of the double fight abilities that some armies have, or some abilities to give you extra pile-in and consolidation moves can be really potent with this kind of thing. I know earlier in the year we saw Eric run some MSU Corn Berserkers that could get like 20 inches or something, 24 inches after the charge of movement when they double fight, like something obscene to just move around.
36.
Yeah, 36 like how ridiculous is that? Like that's crazy. So like getting all this extra movement, you've got Tyranids who have the abilities like Overrun, you know, to once they've consolidated, if they're outside of I think it's 3 inches of any enemy models, they can literally move again. So good. Yeah, they move again, and then they have some factions have the ability to double fight after that. I think it's Kraken that can do that. So like yeah, or is it all the Tyranids? I can't remember. But
I think all Tyranids can fight again for 3 CP,
yeah, so like you can even like
lots of armies have those. It's
and
crazy.
this was seen a lot in 8th edition with Tyranids, where you could like fight, overrun, and then double fight, not to kill stuff, but to tag and wrap everything.
Yeah.
Because your opponent can only, you know, desperate breakout 1 unit. They might only be able to fall back and shoot 1 unit. If you're tagging 4 or 5 things, yeah, that's the final nail. That might be it. You know, that could win you the game. So the other thing people use some stratagems that avoid falling back that Liam mentioned. And even when you get good at it, using terrain to wrap models where you can't physically get stuff. Like you can wrap, you know, rhinos up against walls and things like that, and really, really be niggly in that sense. But yeah, man. Anything else you want to add there, Luke?
Yeah, well, I just to add the fight again stuff. It's more relevant for older codexes because all the new codexes are getting rid of the fight again. But I mean, I'm so happy about that because it's so terrifying actually how much you can actually do just by fighting again, and not even sometimes fighting again just to actually kill something, but fighting again just to utilize the movement. And that's something that I've am amazed by every time. By sometimes when I play certain people, you're like, holy crap, how far did you just move just fighting again? And there was nothing for you to fight. You just did it for the movement and to tag more and more things. Like it's kind of an interesting concept. Even sometimes fighting again, the best one I've seen is fighting again a unit that already wiped another unit just so it could get in combat range with another, you know, opponent unit, but forcing that opponent then to have to pile in towards the original unit, if that makes sense. They've used fight again to make their opponent pile in towards the unit that fought again, as
Yeah,
opposed to
as
killing.
opposed to something else, right?
Yeah, as opposed to, like, because you can dictate what people have to fight. Then it's just so recognizing these opportunities and utilizing them in the best opportune way, I think, is key there.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. But I mean, I think some of the best examples of stuff where this is crazy are units like Space Marines, for example, where let's look at a Blade Guard. A Blade Guard moves 6 inches, but you can actually get these models to move double that again in the fight phase. Like you can do the prayer, for example, to get a 6-inch pile in and consolidate. And then you can go, cool, I'm going to charge with 2 units. My first unit that's not the Blade Guard kills the enemy models. And then when I activate the Blade Guard, they just move 6 inches and then 6 inches again towards the nearest enemy unit.
It's warp time. You've got warp time.
Exactly. It's basically, if you're using combat well, you are at best tripling or even quadrupling your movement characteristic in the fight phase. A phase, where all the normal movement rules apply. You just got to move towards enemy models. So there's so many ways to cross the table quickly and bait people into bad positions and end up wrapping models, which is another one of our topics we're going to talk about on how to avoid some shooting.
Yeah, and leading on to that, Liam, like in 8th edition, wrapping models is a big deal because there was no way, unless they had fly or a teleport ability or failed morale, that if you tri-pointed an infantry model, that they could get out. Now, of course, we have the desperate breakout ability and things like that, but there's nothing stopping you wrapping 2 units. there's nothing stopping you wrapping something to the point where it can't physically use a desperate breakout to get out, so you have to desperate breakout. Let's say you've got a rhino that only moves 3 inches, or there's something you've slowed and you've wrapped, and they can't desperate breakouts without killing it. It's like, cool, well, you just killed a 100+ point model and spent 2 CP. Cool, that's great. I remember you did it in 8th edition, Liam, where you doom bolted a wave serpent against Lachlan and wrapped it to the point where it couldn't fall back.
Hell yeah. I mean, I think people have kind of gotten used to this, or people have gotten used to this, I think, false idea that wrapping has gone away and that you can just leave combat because of desperate breakout. But that's actually made, it sounds harsh, but that has actually made some players lazy in the sense that people think it can't happen, so they don't prepare for it, or they don't screen adequately, or even worse, their screen is not set up correctly, and so their screen becomes the way that you get to their army.
Yeah.
The thing that Denise mentioned before about wrapping 2 separate units is actually extremely easy to do. Take like an almost standard guard army, for example, that will have some infantry squads at the front of the army. People often string out the guardsmen and put them far forwards with move or whatever to stop you from getting to the shooting units. That makes perfect sense. Nobody wants their tanks tagged because most of the guard weapons are blast and they can't fall back and shoot for anything. So the tanks really don't want to go anywhere near combat. Now, if somebody has guard units at the front of their army, no matter how good you are with coherency, you're going to need more than 1 squad to cover your army. And at some point, there's going to be a break in those 2 squads. Even a 10-man, Gene Stealer squad could quite feasibly wrap the last model in both of those squads. And there are so many ways, as Denise and Luke, that you can choose to do less damage, which is another important thing I don't think we spoke about before. I mean, you can't wrap models if they're dead. So one of the really weird and kind of counterintuitive tricks this edition is that because every model that can fight must, you can pile in such a way that only one of your models is within half an inch of half an inch, and therefore only one of your models gets to fight. If only one of your models gets to fight, particularly, let's say, if it's a dude who doesn't have a cool melee weapon like a Thunderhammer or something, he might not kill any models, or he might only kill one. It won't stop you doing what you need to do, and then you can pile in and get all your stuff locked in combat. Heaps of cool tricks you can do there to really sort of maximize every inch, every half an inch on the table to get everything out of your army that you can.
Yeah, 100%, dude.
Mm-hmm. Also, just adding to that as well, even though like Desperate Breakout allows people to fall back and then shoot, it might end up if you do it enough times, or even like forcing them to use that CP expenditure, that CP otherwise would be used on stratagems that would probably benefit their shooting to you anyway. So even if you have the chance and you go, oh man, I can get a wrap off, but he's just going to desperate breakout, it might even be worth doing. You might have to weigh up the pros and cons, obviously, but it might be an avenue worth doing because, you know, you may make them spend critical CP when later on in the game they'll be out of CP and they won't have the damage.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And units that use Desperate Breakout can't do anything else that turn. A unit that Desperate Breakout cannot shoot or declare a charge for any reason. It's in the stratagem. So if, for example, we're talking about, a Deathwatch kill team that I know you can get to fall back and do anything because it's Deathwatch, you can add so much tech to those squads. If you use Desperate Breakout on a squad, it is essentially out of the game for a phase. And so even if you know you're going to get Desperate Breakout and you know that it's not going to slow your opponent down in terms of, that they will be able to get out of combat, it's important to realize that that unit then can't do anything. So even if you know you're going to die, wrapping a unit that's super terrifying if you survive might actually get you way more value than if you'd even been in combat. Like Luke said as well, everything in 40k is an opportunity cost. By making people spend 2 CP on something realistically they definitely didn't want to do, you are setting the game up late game for them running out of resources. And then that's where you start winning. So many times have I played games where turn 4, I'm wrapped in combat, they have 0 CP, they know they get 1 at the start of their turn, but you need 2 to Desperate Breakout. Not many people budget when their army list phase, and I know we've spoken on this podcast before about when you build a list, budgeting your CP. I don't think anyone really budgets 2 CP for Desperate Breakout, but if you're playing a shooting army, maybe you should think about it.
Yeah, and the second, you're exactly right, Liam, and Luke mentioned it before, the second they're using Desperate Breakout, well, the budget for all their other crap's gone. It's like, oh, well, I guess I can't soup up my guns for another turn. They're doing that. So it's great. Even just forcing them to do it, like Luke said, is awesome.
I definitely agree with you, Liam. That I think it myself is as well. People aren't as aware about wrapping anymore. Like it's kind of, oh, we got Desperate Breakout, therefore I won't wrap anymore. But I definitely can see the benefit of still wrapping, even though I sometimes don't do it as often. But then again, I'm mostly playing shooting armies lately.
The other thing as well is that Desperate Breakout is not the perfect get out of jail free card. Like Denise said, if models cannot physically leave combat, they're automatically destroyed. You also roll a dice for the models anyway, and on a 1, a model's destroyed. This is kind of particularly potent if you have a horde army, you wrap your opponent's models, then they Desperate Breakout. On a 1, their models die, and then you use a 1 CP stratagem and you roll a dice for every model in engagement range for your unit. I think it's called Cut Them Down or something. And on a 6, they take a mortal wound. So you can start shredding people just with random incidental mortal wounds and movement. You can start really doing a lot of damage in that sort of phase. But also, if you cannot, there was, I forget exactly where it is, but I know it's one of the Games Workshop FAQs. If you cannot fall back, as in you have a rule that stops you falling back, or you have a movement characteristic of 0, drop pods looking at you, or something like that, you cannot use the Desperate Breakout stratagem. Now, this is super relevant because for such a long time, abilities that locked people in combat were actually not particularly great because you could always just use Desperate Breakout and then die, which was what was happening at the start of this edition in the States quite a lot. It was particularly prevalent. But now, I mean, Beans for Slanesh Devons. I'm pretty sure, the White Scars for Space Marines, Night Lords for Chaos Space Marines.
Witches and stuff,
we could keep going. Witches. Yeah, I mean, there are so many abilities in the game that just flat out stop you from falling back. And all of these abilities basically render the Desperate Breakout stratagem completely moot. It's not going to be a get-out-of-jail-free card for shooting armies. And to really sort of put the nail in the coffin for the people who are thinking, oh, I can't do wrap tricks because of Desperate Breakout, abilities that stop people from acting, which are rare but still exist, are also abilities you can use to stay in combat. The sort of ubiquitous one, the one that's been around for the longest time, is the Forbidden Gem,
Yes.
one of the Slanesh demon relics. And you use this at the start of any enemy phase. You roll 3d6. If you beat their leadership, they can't do anything that phase. They can't use stratagems, they can't use abilities, so on and so forth. Why is this important? Tag a character with Slanesh demons, use the gem, 3d6, reasonable chance to pass against a leadership 9 or leadership 8 character. They can't leave combat. They can't do a fallback move, which means they can't use the desperate breakout stratagem. Win-win. You're now locked in combat. Your entire demon horde is surrounding this poor guard captain who's screaming for his life, but the rest of his army can't save him. He's done. He's in a lot of trouble.
Oh, jeez. Yeah, 100%, dude. So yeah, I think sounds like after listening to us talk about this episode, I don't really want to be a shooting army.
I mean, let's be real, right? Combat armies and shooting armies are kind of like cats and dogs. And the